If there's one thing we should remember about this pandemic, it should be the stocks that the event hyped up to the sky and making us wondering whether we can still profit from them. Ocgn is one of those stocks. If we go back in time, we can see that its price has been increasing significantly since the beginning of the pandemic. But among the many companies that may profit from the current events, I would argue that Ocgn deserves a bit more exploration to figure out if you should buy it. So, if you're thinking about buying Ocgn shares or already hold a position in the company, and you're debating whether you should keep holding it or sell it, then please keep watching this video until the end because we're going to talk about everything I believe you should know about the company. To put it simply, Ocgn's current value proposition is a possible distributor of the Indian vaccine called Covaxin. Covaxin is developed by the Indian pharma giant Bharat Pharma and is currently being sold in some countries. The examples that come to my mind are India and Iran. So far, as far as we are concerned, it's officially still in the phase 3 trial, and the effectiveness seems to hover around 80%. In other words, it's not a Rolls-Royce. It's not even a Toyota. It's a crappy car that you get from Craigslist, but that still gets most of the job done. The stock price of Ocgn once reached the peak of $16 back in February, but then corrected to a much lower level, like less than half where it was, kind of lower level. That sell-off is mostly caused by the general market sell-off and a change in investors' perceptions on where the gold mines are in that very volatile sector. What I mean by this is that at the beginning of the development period, any company that claims that it's getting a vaccine can see its stock price skyrocketing. That was the case for many companies like Vaxxed, Ocgn, and Moderna, to name a few. A lot of startups then began to see their valuations going through the roof, or at least receiving a second life after years of very sloppy performance. Sometimes you don't even need to promise anything like that. But as long as you put in the keywords in your presentation, there will be enough buyers to rush in and start buying your shares. An example comes to my mind about a startup that makes medicine for bowel problems. The reason why investors rushed in was because apparently the virus can leave a secondary effect in your body. That is the bowel problems. And even when the virus is gone, it'll stay around for some time. So as soon as the investors saw this, they bought in the shares of that company. Now, why am I bringing these up? Because that is a very good example of what's going on in the head of most investors in that field until recently. The current reality is that the vaccines are getting distributed, bought and sold and counted for day after day, month after month. The place was getting more and more crowded than before, and it's now a legitimate question for us to ask ourselves if there will be enough demand for all those companies that are all selling vaccines. Yeah, that's probably not the angle that most people talk about, but if you really think about it, we have Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and so on as the giants who are already selling their doses in the United States. Keep in mind that Ocgn gets the distribution rights in the United States. Is there anything that can guarantee us that by the time Covaxin finally gets approved by the regulators, most people who are supposed to get a vaccine in the States already got it? And even if we're assuming that the vaccine is going to be authorized and has enough demand, the current statistics show that Covaxin is almost 15% less effective than its rivals. In that case, we may also see a scenario where patients are going to simply choose other vaccines unless Ocgn sells it at a discount, which will further squeeze its profit margin. Keep in mind that Ocgn doesn't develop this vaccine by itself. It simply distributes it. In other words, it's kind of like the retailer in this case. With that being said, let's take a quick look at the possible scenarios ahead of us. If Ocgn receives the authorization and the vaccine gets to be distributed, then the stock will initially take off before quickly correcting itself because most shareholders have been holding the bag for some time. That's my assumption. If Ocgn doesn't get the authorization to distribute it, then it's really going to be Armageddon for the share price. Do you guys remember what happened with Workhorse? I know that they work in different sectors, but both companies have most of their stock value depending on one single event. And that to me is a little signal saying don't put in too many of your eggs in this one single basket because it may bust. But with all that being said, I would argue that there is still a play for Ocgn shares. If you want to profit from the stock, you should be waiting for the correction to slow down. And all that before the results about if they get to distribute Covaxin comes down. During that period of time, the stock can mechanically go back, simply because sellers have finished selling the shares and buyers will retake the control. I believe that the value of the stock is currently in the short-term speculation. I'm really not sure about the long-term at the moment. Of course, this can change at any moment if Ocgn decides to purchase or merger with other companies to add more products in its portfolio. For now, the company has one single card in its hand, and it's called Covaxin. If you want to buy Ocgn shares, I would suggest to keep your position within 1% of your portfolio. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.